Good evening and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Mike Yassa. I'm the director of the UCI Brain Initiative, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here tonight. I'm going to keep my comments very, very brief because actually our introduction will be delivered by our Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs, Dr. Steve Goldstein. And I'd like to tell you a little bit more about him before he gets up here and tells you more about UCI and the brain. Vice Chancellor Steve Goldstein leads UCI Health Affairs, which is comprised of the UCI Health System and the Susan and Henry Samueli College of Health Sciences. The college includes the School of Medicine, the Sue and Bill Gross School of Nursing, and the planned School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Science, and also the planned School of Population and Public Health. Two of those are brand new. And the Susan Samueli Integrative Health Institute, so quite an enterprise at UCI. Dr. Goldstein holds an MD and PhD in immunology from Harvard University. A pediatric cardiologist, his research has identified 2 gene families for potassium channels and a novel regulatory pathway for excitable membrane proteins, opening up their study in human health and disease. Given that, I'm delighted to just refer to him for today as a neuroscientist. His work has advanced methods in interventional cardiology, produced diagnostic tests and new techniques, for example, the creation of neuroactive peptides based on natural products that treat disease. When Dr. Goldstein joined UCI in February of this year, so not too long ago, he brought with him more than 30 years of experience in health science research, medical education, and higher education administration, which includes serving at Harvard, Yale, University of Chicago, and Brandeis, and now finally at UC Irvine. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs, Steve Goldstein.
It is truly a pleasure to be here. My trajectory from the East Coast to the West Coast means I've come to paradise and to an intellectual haven of progress. So I am delighted to be here. 9 months in, I'm as excited as I was when I said I decided to come. So I'm very pleased to be with you tonight to celebrate the launch of the UCI Brain Initiative. And I'd like to share the good wishes as well of Chancellor Gilman and Provost Lavernia. In fact, we were all in Oakland this morning at the Office of the President, where the sum total of the discussion we had was UCI is leading the way, and there's so many things we can show the world. So this is not hyperbole. This is who we are because of you. So in keeping with that, I'd like to talk a second about UCI, the UCI Brain Initiative. It's an audacious and compelling vision to unite the campus with the community with the common goal of understanding the mysteries of the brain. The initiative is committed to interdisciplinary education and building programs for the leaders of tomorrow. It's in great company. There are 5 academic initiatives that the Provost Office supported, and they cut across disciplines to solve the world's great challenges. And the reason that makes so much sense is because when you're at the edges of disciplines, you're often taking the best of both to create something that hasn't been seen before and advance. It's often the way new disciplines are born. So this is critical to the trajectory of science at the cutting edge, as we do at UCI. I've listed a few of the centers up here that were funded. You can see that they actually do have a common taste to them, a common theme. The Center for Neurobiology and Learning and Memory, the Institute for Memory Impairments and Neurologic Disorders, the Beckman Laser Institute, and the Sue and Bill Gross Stem Cell Center. There are many other strong centers on campus that are also part of all of the work we do together. Now, combining strengths across departments and schools makes a lot of sense. Many of you, depending on wherever you are in the world, know, though, that bringing people together is a challenge. People are often siloed. They say, don't get too close because you may touch the thing that I'm in charge of. But what happens at the university is that people realize that by talking to each other, we really jump ahead in a way no one else has been able to do. And so these are just some of the last few months of successes that are worth mentioning that relate directly to the UCI Brain. So there's a team that received a $15 million grant to the Conti Center for the NIH on early life origins of mental health disorders. The Sleep Center was recently launched. It's just collecting data on sleep and brain health, which I think is going to be extraordinarily exciting. We just got an award, a T32 grant, which is the type of grant that supports pre-doctoral students so that they have the pipeline of coming into the future that we're creating. And this is the perfect place to do this type of work, because most of you probably don't know that the very first department of neuroscience was founded at UCI in 1964. So we have legacy. So I am thrilled to be here today so that you can hear from true experts, world-leading experts in brain research. And I think I'll step one step back for a second and say that we are launching a capital campaign now for the university, and that's audacious as well, because its 4 pillars are so powerful, and they relate to the expertise that these leaders have at who are in front of us today. One of the pillars is advancing the American dream, and I will brag to say that the New York Times notices us and calls us #1 for that in the country as a university. And if you want to start talking about #1, we actually displaced Princeton as #1 in Money Magazine. So I'm sure if you went to Princeton, it was a very fine education. The other pillars are transforming healthcare and wellness. That relates to what we're talking about. Accelerating world-changing research. That relates to what we're talking about. And exploring the human experience, which happens through the brain. So it is a pleasure to be here tonight. It is a pleasure to welcome you to meet our experts. We are here with your help and together to create the brilliant future, which is the name of our capital campaign. So at this time, what I'd really like is maybe going down the road this way. If our experts could introduce a minute or two. The problem is they could each talk for an hour and give you the most exciting lecture you've ever heard. So if you can take a minute or two and just introduce yourselves to the audience, that would be great.
So hi, thanks very much for coming tonight to see us and have this conversation. My name is Aileen Anderson. I'm a professor here. I'm director of the Stem Cell Research Center in the College of Health Sciences. My own research focuses on understanding how stem cells that we transplant or stem cells that are present in your own brain and spinal cord can be used in the context of therapeutic repair and the kinds of signals that they get from the environment that tell them how to do that and that we can manipulate in order to make them do a better job.
My name is Frank LaFerla. I'm the Dean of the School of Biological Sciences, and I'm really honored to be here tonight as well. I want to give a special shout out to Mike Yassa for everything that he's done for the Brain Initiative. So maybe we should give him a round of applause. That's truly remarkable, and I think Mike is one of the few people who could pull this off. So I've been at UC Irvine since 1995. Not as long as Gary Lynch, although I had an interview with Gary in the trailer talking about the Phillies back in 1995. But I actually have 2 jobs here, and besides being dean, I also run the campus Alzheimer's Center. And I'll just tell you a little secret. We just found out that we got a pretty excellent score, and we anticipate that that's going to be refunded for another 5 years, but don't tell anybody.
Can I just brag for a second? You know, when you get a grant to support something really big the first time, it's because everybody says, oh, that's so exciting. We need to do it. We need to do it. When you repeat it the way he's done multiple times, that's because you're seen as leading the field. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Ruth Benka. I'm the chair of Psychiatry and Human Behavior, and I am a psychiatrist, but primarily a sleep specialist. So I take care of people with sleep problems, and I do research on sleep pretty much across the lifespan. So I'm interested in how sleep is important for brain development, and also how it relates to neurodegenerative disorders and psychiatric disorders. I'm very excited to be here. I've been here for 3 years, and we've just built what I think is going to be one of the best sleep centers in the country.
Yeah. I'm Gary Lynch, and I think we should also take note that Manuela Yassa should probably get some praise here. Mike's a miracle man, but there's more to this going on, so she should get a real recognition. And congratulations to all of you for being here at 6 o'clock at night for what is a bound to be an uncertain episode. But to the point, I'm Gary Lynch, and I'm a professor of psychiatry and human behavior. I work for Dr. Benka. I guess I'm best known for being solely responsible for bringing Dean LaFerla to this campus. But I work in the area, my work is about the encoding and organization of information in the brain and how that magical process works and why it so often goes wrong. So that's what I do.
Hello, good evening. I'm Nancy Gera, and I'm a developmental psychologist. Full disclosure, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I think the work I do, and I'm also the dean of the School of Social Ecology, which is a holistic way of looking at people, environments, and we have psychology, criminology, urban planning, public policy. So we really look at systems, and I think my contribution here is in the work that I do myself is in understanding and preventing violence in childhood and adolescence. And it's actually very interesting all the ways that neuroscience has kind of entered into the prevention arena, the policy arena, and even the ethical and moral arena. So for example, if you can identify brain patterns associated with antisocial behavior, if someone is being charged with a homicide, but they actually have a brain pattern that is, abnormal, is that reason that they shouldn't be found guilty? So there are a lot of interesting issues that arise that connect neuroscience to many, many areas. So that's probably why I'm here.
I'm Ralph Greenspan. I'm professor of biology and in the section of neurobiology at UCSD, and I'm also the co-director of CalBrain and the director of the Center for Brain Activity Mapping at UCSD. And my lab works on cognition in the fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster, and we are studying the brain activity patterns that are present when it learns something and when it forgets something and when it pays attention to something. All the important things about my biography were gone over by Ann Kaloff and Arthur Lander when they introduced me for my talk at 4 o'clock.
So I think Steve and I are both mic'd, so we're going to leave these mics with you guys. And I think what we'll do is we'll kind of take turns a little bit, and we've got some questions, lots of questions from the audience, some better than others. Some of you have got to up your game a little bit, but we'll see what we can do. And I think we'll just kind of run through some of those questions and see how well we do. Maybe I'll ask Vice Chancellor Goldstein to start us off with a question.
All right, I'm actually going to start with a softball.
Fair enough.
Given the last introduction, this brain has got lots of bits in it. May not be smarter than a fruit fly, but why is studying a fruit fly going to tell you something about all of our brains?
Well, because of evolution and conservation. Because we know from studies of gene expression patterns during development in the fruit fly brain and parallel studies that have been done in the mammalian brain, that the genes that give rise to the brain are much more conserved and appear at more of the same times during development than any of us ever expected would be true. So it's actually possible from that point of view to make inferences about what might be present in a mammalian brain from the fruit fly brain. And as we now have the technical capability of recording simultaneously the neuronal activity all over the fly brain at one time in real time, then things that we find out there from what are designed to be studies of homologous behaviors can probably be extrapolated to studies in the mouse as a guide, as a way of guiding them.
I think that's kind of cool. I don't know what you guys think.
I add to that?
Please.
And, you probably heard today from Dr. Tenner's talk about Model AD. It's a similar rationale for why you want to try and model complex human disorders like Alzheimer's disease in mice as well. I mean, there are obviously some caveats. A mouse is never going to be an accelerated human, but there's enough similarity that you could try to extrapolate mechanisms and can evaluate drugs and potential therapies in these simpler models.
So I have oh, sorry, go ahead, Ruth.
I'm going to add one more thing. Sure. As someone who studied migrating birds for a while. So the other thing I think that's really important about animal models is that instead of just trying to see how we can sort of create or look for human behaviors in animals, we also need to do the opposite. We need to study animal behavior and understand how it may be informing some of our own behavior and how our behavior has developed from that. So, for example, we studied migrating birds who turn out to be really, really similar to people with bipolar disorder, and is probably the best animal model out there for bipolar disorder, because humans and other creatures are also very seasonal, and our mood behaviors can be very seasonal.
I like it when we get a wow.
I know, you got everybody excited. So I'll ask this question of Dr. Anderson. What can you do to repair brain damage? And maybe from a stem cell perspective, what can you tell us about what the future holds for something like traumatic brain injury or any sort of brain damage?
So what the future holds is always a tricky story, right? So I can tell you a little bit about maybe what we can do in the near future and what our kind of aspirational goals are in terms of thinking about stem cells and how they'll work for human neurological diseases going forward. So in the near-term future, with California Institute for Regenerative Medicine support, we have learned an awful lot about stem cells as potential therapies. There's over 60 funded clinical trials ongoing now with stem cells or targeting the stem cell in the state of California with that funding. In the case of traumatic brain injury or things like stroke, other sorts of injuries, we know we can transplant those cells and they can do one of two things that really help a whole bunch. They can make a bunch of stuff. They can make trophic factors, kind of like food for other cells that are around, and support them and make the cells that are remaining after an injury just work better. They can also do a second thing, which is to do what we originally thought of when we thought about doing cell transplants, and that's to replace the cells that are lost. We're getting better and better at doing that in terms of our research in the lab, and in fact, work that's moved through into clinical trial now, so that you can transplant cells in clinical trials that are ongoing for stroke, for example, for spinal cord injury, and either replace cells that provide insulation and are lost, called myelinating cells, or make new neurons that seem to, in animal models and in early clinical trials, improve the ability of the brain, or in fact the spinal cord, to function. So that's kind of where we are now. We need to make those things better. We need to figure out better ways to be able to have those cells survive long-term when we transplant them into humans and move on to the next stage of clinical trials. But really our aspirational goal is to be able to take the cells that we know that everyone has in their brain and in their spinal cord that are stem cells, or a resident stem cell population in adults, and be able to turn them on. so that we can activate them appropriately, and rather than have to transplant a cell population, be able to get your brain to heal itself after an injury. And that would be our long-term scenario for where things will move over the next 10 or 20 years.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask a question that builds on that a little bit. The way it's asked here is, what new things can seniors do to enhance brain capacity? And so the reason I'm saying it's a little bit of a switch is because we all know that over time that capacity diminishes, but that's not an acute damage that we're trying to fix. And so maybe certainly.
I think there's a lot of evidence, and certainly Mike's lab has contributed to this. Carl Kottman's lab here has shown that exercise is perhaps one of the most powerful things that you could do to maintain brain health. And I think the remarkable aspect, and Mike can certainly comment on this, is how little exercise you actually need to do, right?
Yay!
Right.
Sorry.
30 seconds or less?
Not quite that little, right? But we're talking, walking 20 minutes,
10
10
minutes, 20
minutes or
minutes,
so a day, maybe even better if you walk 10 minutes with a friend and you're talking and engaging. So I think one of the things that we have found, and Gary certainly would be better to comment on this, is that biology has changed remarkably over the last 5 to 10 years. I would say before that, when we were in the molecular biology era, we took this incredibly reductionistic approach, and perhaps we as neuroscientists were very guilty of thinking of the brain as this very special organ that just floated out there by itself, and we forgot that it was connected to the rest of the body. And now we know that your body's health matters as well, and even what you eat might matter. And we know that your gut microbiome may affect your health. And so we've now, I think, are realizing that we need to take more of a systemic approach. So what can you do to keep your brain active? The first thing is don't age, right? Because we know that age is the most significant risk factor. The alternative is good. But, there are, building on what Aileen said, there are some authors out there that think we may live for a long time, and that in the future, because of the potential of regenerative medicine, we'll be able to regenerate new body parts, and that if you die, it's going to be because you got hit by a bus or something along those lines. But, aging is a significant risk factor. We know that 5% of the population over the age of 65 has Alzheimer's disease, and that number doubles every 5 years thereafter. So by the time you're 80 or 85, essentially half the population has it. Exercise, staying cognitively engaged, staying socially engaged, I think is absolutely critical. Don't be obese, don't get diabetes, don't smoke, drink in moderation. These are some of the things that most of us believe are beneficial, and probably getting a good night's sleep.
This is one of the biggest, my biggest pet peeves is that when we talk about healthy aging, we always talk about diet and exercise and stimulating your brain and social interactions, et cetera, et cetera. But a third of your life is spent sleeping. And most of that is for your brain health and brain development. And sleep is critically important for learning and memory and cognitive function. We now estimate that at least 15% of Alzheimer's disease is solely or almost exclusively related to sleep problems and sleep disorders. And we're also learning new ways to modulate sleep oscillations and perhaps increase some of the important ones through various techniques, not just medications. And that this is something that we really have to pay attention to. So it's very important not only to get sufficient sleep, but to sleep at more or less the same times every day. So the timing of sleep is important, and identifying and treating sleep disorders if they're present.
The interesting thing about the enhancement possibilities is that we actually have learned a great deal in the last few years about what's going wrong. Now, there's mounting evidence, surprisingly, I think it's surprising, that your dendrites of your neurons are actually atrophying as part of normal aging, all right? Which is kind of shocking to think about.
Can you say what a dendrite is in case?
I thought you were going to say speak for yourself. But there's good evidence, and this is, by the way, one of the things that goes across mammals. This is a general mammal feature. Rats, monkeys, humans. And one of the more shocking things about it is you can pick this up by middle age. Aging is not a disease of the old. Aging, and I love to tell students this. Yeah, I know you're feeling really good looking at us and going, speak for yourself. But the truth is, by the time you're 30, you've aged. There are good studies out there showing you've already lost a significant amount of memory capacity. In fact, the most quantitative study of this kind said you lose as much memory capacity between 20 and 30 as you do between 60 and 70. Now, it appears that, strangely enough, the brain is simply beginning to atrophy early in life, almost from the time you've passed into maturity. You go up, and then you start to go down. It's a terrible deal. But here's the good news is that we know that the brain has growth factors. And these growth factors are incredibly potent. And some of the factors that Dr. LaFerla was talking about and that Dr. Benka were talking about are in fact features that are stimulating these growth factors, your own endogenous growth factors. So since the title here is how's brain science going to affect the future of the humanity, I would say a reasonable bet is that we will get a good handle on the ways in which to enhance the normal growth patterns of the brain, restore those, not by any drastic manipulations. As Frank said, exercise, and one of our colleagues, Carl Kottman, who was introduced this whole thing, stressed the point from the beginning that what the exercise is doing is actually increasing the production of your own endogenous growth factors.
And it makes you sleep better. And it makes you sleep better.
And it makes you sleep better. She's my boss, so whatever she does, yep. So I'm trying to say is I do think that in the not distant future, you're going to see a major impact of the brain science, of the research, of the stuff you've been hearing about today, on the very idea of enhancing and slowing of aging. Tragically, it might be a little too late for some of us.
So
Thank you.
I want to follow up very quickly with a slightly different version of that answer, which is we can look at really successful examples. And there's one in particular in this room. She's sitting all the way up there in the corner. I don't think she knew I was going to call on her. But my good friend Betty Soloway, who's right in the corner there, just had her 100th birthday. And if you know Betty, you know she is still sharp as a tack, and she is incredibly active socially. She comes to all of our events. She's very engaged with UCI. So clearly you're doing something that we all need to figure out how you're doing it. So we can add all the chocolate, see? And you know what chocolate has? Caffeine. That's a story for another day. But maybe I can ask Dean Gera also to comment on the value of social relationships and social interactions, especially as we get older. Do you feel that this is an important component also of this healthy longevity aspect?
Well, of course, and people in our school, we do have a lot of people who are studying healthy aging. And what I think is interesting to bring to this is the idea of health span versus lifespan. That seems to be kind of a new way of thinking about healthy life rather than just how long can you live. And so the way that social support works clearly is, and in our school, we have a number of people studying compassion. And I was just talking with Ralph here that UC San Diego got $100 million to have a compassion institute that's actually looking at the neuroscience of compassion, that acting in a compassionate way actually predicts changes in your brain functioning. And so being kind is good for your brain, and connecting with other people really has a benefit in terms of your brain function. And let me add one thing to that, because I do a lot of work in prevention and policy, and probably in my world, one of the biggest contributions of the neuroscience research is that it's hard to argue with brain science. You can argue with my opinion or this study or that study, but when you show an impact on the brain, it really is the last word. And if you look at, like, on the other end of the spectrum, all of the 0 to 10 and all of the universal preschool and all the movement around early childcare, that was 95% really kind of bolstered along by all the research on early brain development and the importance of early brain development and early reading and early social interactions for children. And had we not had that as really a leg to stand on, people would have said, oh, that's just one other thing you're saying. Well, yeah, of course it is. So I think neuroscience goes beyond just even its benefit for each individual, but it has a social policy benefit. And it's an argument that you really, it's hard to refute. I'll just add one other thing, because this is an interesting story. I do a lot of work with low-income moms out in Santa Ana, immigrant moms, and we had this intervention on parent-child interaction with children. And one of the colleagues who was a neuroscientist wanted to put in a section on the brain and how your child's brain works and how your child's brain develops. And I said to myself, these are low literate moms who, we're going to start talking neuroscience. And they said, no, let's do it. And we did it, and it was transformational. The moms were just, oh my gosh, I don't want to ruin my child's brain. So in a way, even though it's so complicated, the way we hear about it here, it's also so simple, because people get that. Your child's brain development depends on what you do right now. And the moms just ate it up, and they were looking at the synapses and how they're formed and they really got into it. So there's lots of collateral ways that this impacts beyond just individuals.
You almost answered the question that someone asked, but it was the reverse. So I'm going to ask you to continue, which is, do you think advances in brain science will lead to the cultivation of a more compassionate society?
If I knew the answer to that one. Right now, we've made a lot of advances in neuroscience, and if anything, we're getting less compassionate, which is a challenge. I think the more we can show that compassion is good for us, so it's not just the right thing to do for other people. I mean, sad to say in some ways that we have to show that it ultimately benefits you. But nevertheless, if we show that acting in a compassionate way has psychological and health advantages for you, and I think that's a lot of the impetus behind, the $100 million Compassion Institute in UCSD, and UCLA just got $20 million for a Kindness Institute. So I think in some way the antithesis to what's happening around the world right now is, well, how does kindness help? And then, of course, again, how does kindness impact our brain? And we're trying to develop a program for corporate leaders on compassionate capitalism. For us, the more we have neuroscience research saying that acting compassionate improves memory, improves, functioning, cognitive functioning, that's a useful way to do it. So maybe
and for those of you who are listening, there was 100 million and 20 million. So halfway, 60 million, she would just accept, right?
If the check comes today, she'll settle for 60.
Can I add to that? I mean, sadly, I agree with Nancy. I do think we're becoming less compassionate. And there is a fascinating book that just came out a couple months ago by an Israeli philosopher, Yuval Noah Harari. And he talks about that very issue in there. And he talks about how governments have seemed to degenerate. We've almost gone back to becoming fascist and have adopted policies that are anti-compassionate. Let's have some theories in there. Yeah, it's interesting. I would recommend it. It's the book is called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And it's an easy read, but just really fascinating.
So my next question, I'm going to direct this at Professor Lynch. This is about Elon Musk. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the famous Elon Musk. of multiple fames, but this is in particular about his company, Neurolink. So not SpaceX, not Tesla, but Neurolink, right? The lesser known of the three, maybe. But they made splashes recently by creating this interface, this brain-computer interface with a very, very large, I think over 3,000 channels, and making the case that they're now advancing this to potentially be beneficial also in humans. They're still testing it in rodents, of course, but eventually getting to that point. What are your thoughts on this? Having been sort of in and out of that field over an extended period of time, what are your thoughts on it? Maybe you can ask Dr. Greenspan to comment on this also after.
Well, there's an emerging area here that's actually, it's a complex region. Frankly, I don't think we have anything like the knowledge now to even begin to guess how many neurons or microfibers you'd have to get into the brain so that you'd be able to actually sample enough information to pull something useful back, or to stimulate and actually generate anything that was cognitive. If the question of inserting wires into the brain is reduced to things like, would we be able to increase compassion, then I think you might treat that seriously. If you said, and it's a kind of a scary prospect, the idea that you would be inserting wires to do things like jiggle basic emotions, right? To control anger or to elicit anger, to stimulate, to engage relatively simple circuits that we share with the animals. I'm pointing at Ralph, I mean flies. Ralph's a very complex animal, actually. But if that's the kind of goal, but I don't think it is. I think what they are actually imagining is they're going to get into the world of more complex cognitive activities. And I'm extremely skeptical that they're going to be able to do anything useful in that area. That said, building techniques for interfacing with the brain presents a number of really quite scary prospects right now. After all, society is getting weirder and weirder. I'm sure that most of you haven't noticed this over the last 2-3 years, or turn on your television during the day. But the idea that they're out there developing the technologies that would allow people to interface with your brain, again, not control your thoughts, but maybe push around your emotions, that's not really science fiction. And if they're developing the technologies, even if they're misguided in what they think their endpoint is, the technologies might lead someone else to that.
Aileen?
So, is that on? There's a different aspect to this, and that comes out of my realm. So my lab works heavily on spinal cord injury, in part in the context of neural stem cells. And brain stimulation there, not specifically in the context of Neurolink, has opened up an array of opportunities I don't think anyone would have dreamt about 10 years ago. So you can actually record the electrical potentials at the surface of the brain in someone who is completely paralyzed, arms and legs, and be able to do what's called a closed loop stimulation from those recordings to their muscles to enable them to reach out, pick up a glass of water, and take a drink. That's an amazing thing, right, to be able to accomplish. And so Neurolink accepted, right, the advances that have been made in that area in the context of motor control and what we may be able to give back to people that are living with chronic neurological diseases and conditions are really pretty huge.
Yeah, no, that's true. There is a possibility of neuroprosthetics, but they're doing a kind of a game where they're trying to go both recording and stimulating, and that's not their target. But I take your point, and I think you're right. There may be something very useful in neuroprosthetics coming along.
Yeah.
So I want to see what Ralph thinks about this possibility, in particular as related to things like the Brain Initiative and CalBrain. Here you have a commercial enterprise that claims to have made rapid advances on brain-computer interfaces, To what extent do you see this working hand in hand in competition with the enterprises that you talked about earlier today? And importantly, and maybe this is for the entire panel, and it was hinted to a little bit, what are the ethical implications of being able to really crack something like what Gary talked about?
Well, the ethical implications are clearly huge, given that there is the prospect of controlling people's actions, not just their emotions, but their actions. And for that reason, it was included as one of the issues to be addressed when NIH first laid out its plan for the Brain Initiative, that they would have a portion of it that was actually going to address those problems and have people try to think through how to manage the things that may come up from that. And that things are going to come up from it is inevitable because, as we know, technological advances are double-edged swords, and for all the good that can come out of them, there are always bad things that can come out as well, and we can bet on the fact that they will also be exploited. So that some of the science fiction fears that have been raised over the years could become realities for us, and how to deal with those is something that scientists have never been very good at dealing with the ethical consequences of what they do. It's certainly not in advance, and oftentimes after the fact, and even then maybe not so great. But it doesn't seem to be a very much of a human strength to be able to anticipate problems and address them before they've come to fruition as problems.
So let me move back to a very real-life question. Everybody talks about how sleep is very important. You've told us that at least 3 times tonight. But taking sleep aids is not good for you. So how do we solve this?
Well, I would, sleep aids are probably not ideal. There are probably some people who can benefit from sleep aids, particularly used short term, but the strongest evidence for insomnia is actually cognitive behavioral therapy. And we know it works much better than sleep aids. It has more long-term effects, and it doesn't have really any side effects. The problem with behavioral therapy is the same problem that we have with exercise. Everybody knows it's good for you, and we might, sort of start our New Year's resolution and do it for a couple of days or weeks, and then we kind of peter out. It's always easier to take a pill than actually have to do work. And that's, I think one of the issues with health behaviors in general, because that's what we've been talking about. What's good for your brain is good for your body. So all these things, eating properly, exercising, not abusing substances, getting enough sleep, et cetera, are going to make you healthier and live longer and are going to be good for your brain, but it's work. That's the issue. I think along those lines, there have been some studies that have come out that have gotten some people kind of scared about taking sleeping pills. Some suggestions that if you take sleeping medications, you're at an increased risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. And so I have patients coming in, with those concerns. I think that that data is kind of controversial, and there are some studies now that have looked at some of these analyses more carefully. And one of the problems, of course, is that people who have sleep problems are much more likely eventually to develop Alzheimer's. And so sleep disturbances may be a very early prodromal sign. So when we're treating a sleep problem with a sleeping medication and that person later develops Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, is it because they took a sleeping pill or that they were just kind of on their way to that? And that's probably more likely what's going on. So on the other side, I don't think people should get anxious if they're taking sleeping medications and it's helping them and they're not having problems with it.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a question that's a little bit more general. We go from super specific to very, very general. This is from From the perspective of neuroscience, in what ways is perception a creative act? Anybody is welcome to answer this very, very difficult existential question.
Say the question?
I'm going to repeat it just for Dr. Lynch. So, from the perspective of neuroscience, can we think of perception as a creative act? Now, the person who wrote this question down, which I just love this question, did say this is an artistic brain question, so they're thinking about it from the arts. But immediately some things come to mind about how we represent information that are incomplete copies of reality and so on. So does anybody want to comment on that a little bit? Is there a creative act to perception?
Right. Fools rush in where, of course, angels. We were earlier talking about animal models. Now, I know that's a strange place to begin answering your question or addressing your question. Humans are using, we're separated from any other animal on this earth by a colossal neocortex. All right, so 75% of your brain is one giant cortex. All right, compare that to a rat or even to a monkey. You have these vastly expanded area of your brain. That vast territory has taken over what's even seemingly simple functions, such as perception. I mean, after all, rats perceive. Slugs perceive. But humans, they don't do it the same way. They've transferred it up into this colossal 10 trillion or 10 billion cell system with trillions of connections. They've transferred it up there. Virtually everything that we're doing is a creative act. So, of course, where does this leave us? One place it leaves us is we can't even be assured that your perception is my perception of the very same thing. Even something as dramatic as Steve here. How could you possibly have different perceptions? But I can assure you that when you're looking at him, you're creating something in your head that's very different than what's in my head. Now, if we had a bunch of rats up here, they would see the same thing.
Probably. So
How many see Brad Pitt? How many?
Don't move, please.
Well, as a psychiatrist, I have to add a little bit too, because, I mean, as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking about it. So we know, for example, another thing that our neocortex does is it helps us have moods. And that's one of the problems with a lot of animal research is that animals just aren't capable of kind of some of the emotional sort of colors that we move through. And we know, for example, that people with bipolar disorder tend to be some of the most creative individuals. They are highly overrepresented in the arts, writers, musicians, painters, and having worked with patients over the years with some severe mental disorders, and some of them were incredible artists of various types. And so clearly their perceptions are somewhat different from each other and from some of the rest of the population. So, and then you can certainly get into the whole issue of dreaming. And so, in dreaming, our neocortex is sort of taking all sorts of random stimuli and creating these incredibly bizarre creative stories. I mean, we all have experiences of really wild dreams sometimes, and it's a form of perception. It's a sort of a perception of something going on internally, but that's what our brains are doing.
But you can take pleasure. Oh, Ralph, go ahead.
I'm speaking now not from my experience with fruit flies, but from what I've learned about the human brain, and that is that it's probably language that is the reason that we can square between ourselves what Gary just elaborated on. The idea that our brains probably are all doing these things in somewhat different ways, but that the way we standardize ourselves so that we agree on what's happening is through the fact that we have language. And having language is of inestimable importance for the development of the human brain and for things like our ability to talk about the fact that we have perceptions.
You know, it's interesting, a kind of a related theme to this, and it's unfortunate. Is Beth Loftus in the audience today? She was here earlier. I think she might have had to dart out, but she would have been a perfect person to address this question. And the issue of whether language actually allows for this altered perception to be described, and whether it allows for this perception or this creation to change over time with multiple retellings, so that language plays a role in the facilitation of these false memories. So,
But I was just going to add to that. I mean, the fact that you can construct false memories, I mean, I actually wonder with our current president if somehow he's constructed false memories of things that they're actually real for him. But I mean, her work has really been seminal in this whole way that perception can be changed through suggested language. But, you know, even beyond that, there's a lot of work on eyewitness testimony where what I see and what you see may be very different, even though we both saw the same thing. And so people recall it all differently. And then, you know, there are a lot of interrogation procedures where there's, and it's actually found its way, the neuroscience research, into policy and practice, where you can encourage people by different words that you use, different suggestions to, you know, pick a particular suspect as the one who did it. And there's all kinds of ways that this is infused in terms of how you can alter people's perceptions.
Just one final word on, I hope, final word. Well, it was a good question, Mike.
wasn't mine, but okay.
Yes, language is critical to this, but the very fact that what you just mentioned is a very good point. Elizabeth Loftus's work on the unreliability of your memory and how easy it is to insert material into it. The very fact that it's so unreliable, that's in some sense a cost. But what you get in return is that same process may be the process by which you gain imagination. There's the Nobel Prize laureate Leon Cooper, who was is one of the great theoretical physicists of the 20th century, decided he would write a book on brain. What he was really interested in was this question of, well, is artificial intelligence going to creep up on us and replace us and that sort of business? And he decided in the end of the day that he couldn't imagine a physical artificial intelligence system that would reproduce human imagination. And he ends his book by saying, this is the most inspiring thought he's had. This is a guy who basically invented superconductivity and changed the world. The most inspiring thought he has at the end of this is that in the end, human imagination is the magic. And that magic sauce isn't going to come from any kind of current version of AI.
Wow, I like that.
Can I just add one thing from a developmental perspective?
Yeah.
I assume many of you have children or have been around children, and if you look at children around age 2 and 3, they all, across the world, any culture, they start engaging in pretend play, which is really this early starting of practicing imagination. They have imaginary friends and all of these things. So they're essentially pre-wired in how we evolve and develop. So that's a good, hopeful thought that imagination will save us. That's the lesson, take-home message.
So this question, I'm going to reframe it slightly, starting with something Frank said, which is most of us with enough gray hair started as reductionists. We wanted to know, what does that one cell, what nerve do? What does those one protein do? And then we began to realize we had to put at least a few things together. And now we're talking about trillions of connections. So that's a process that makes it almost impossible for me to understand how we will come to understand thought or brain function if we try and put it back together again from the pieces. So where are you as you're looking for what comes next after we now understand we need to understand the complexity in the systems?
Shame that Jim's not here because he's always fond of talking about how the brain is perhaps the most complex structure in the known universe. And I think the estimates are that the average adult male has somewhere on the order of about 86 billion neurons. Each of them can make 5,000 to 7,000 connections. So you're talking about a quadrillion different possibilities that go on, which I think is just illustrating your point there. It is complex, right? And then I think that's why we will have jobs for quite a long period of time, is to help unravel this. But there's something to be said about taking a holistic approach. Things are often not as simple as we initially described them, including Alzheimer's disease, right? I mean, the classic definition of Alzheimer's disease that was described by Dr. Alzheimer's over 100 years ago was that there were two components of the disorder, neuropathologic, plaques and tangles. And yet, one of the things that has been a recurring finding in every center, every major academic medical center throughout the country, is how rare it is to find people with just plaques and tangles in their brain. They have vascular damage, they have Lewy body pathology, which is one of the signature features of Parkinson's disease, and many other ailments going on. And it's pretty rare to find someone with Alzheimer's who just suffers from Alzheimer's. They have a lot of other comorbidities as well. And so it's all integrated. And that's why, for us, at least in the School of Biological Sciences, the three words that describe what we're doing are mind, body, world. And the idea is that for most of us, to have a healthy mind, you need to have a healthy body. To have a healthy body, you need to have a healthy world, because life is truly integrated.
Will we ever be able to put mind together from its parts, I guess?
Gary probably can answer that better.
I didn't mean to stop you from...
I mean, there's some people that think that we can, right? I mean, and so I guess the question is, what do you mean by mind? There are some that are, arguing that because of artificial intelligence, because you could actually physiologically measure a response to your taste in music or to this particular artwork, that you'll be able to predict using artificial intelligence what kind of music you like or what kind of songs you like. And that to me is very intriguing and scary at the same time.
Well, I was going to turn that question on its head a little bit. So, because I'm a very translational scientist, right? And so this is a philosophical discussion. I think it's an important one. It's an interesting one. But just turning that question around for a second, the complexity of the brain and the central nervous system is incredible. But the interesting piece to sort of keep your eye on in terms of what the potential is for us on the regenerative medicine side of the game is that there are a lot of cues remain that these cells know what to do. So I started working in spinal cord injury back in the early 2000s, and I was part of an international consortium on spinal cord injury, and the huge debate at that time was that now that we were finally able to get neurons to be able to regrow a little bit, to regenerate, what were we going to do with that? And it kind of broke down into two camps. One camp said that system is just way too complex. We're going to have to give instructions every step of the way to tell those cells that we're sending projections out where to go and how to connect and now how to make a synapse on the totally reductionist side of things. We were just going to have to, like writing a computer program, give absolutely every detail so that you would be able to get function back. And there was a different camp that said, I think that this is a system that functions all day long during normal development, and it functions as an adult. And if you just point those cells in the right direction and give them a little bit of a push, they'll figure it out. And it turns out that both sides are probably true, but you can get a lot of function by just relying on the system to figure it out. And so it's a cool philosophical context, but there's a reality that in terms of normal function, there's plasticity, and plasticity has a way of making things work.
So maybe we don't need to know to make it work?
So can I ask a follow-up on this? It's a really interesting perspective that you're bringing, Aileen, because I think from a translational science perspective, it completely makes sense. Maybe a small portion of the information is really all you need to be able to solve a problem. But what if the nature of the problem is a little bit different? What if it really requires a full and fundamental understanding of every neuron, every pattern, every synapse, every action potential? When Ralph talked about this earlier today as the big vision for the Brain Initiative, well, that's one goal, and the question is to what end, what does that solve, and do you need that to treat a whole host of different disorders? This is what I'm getting at. With something like spinal cord injury or movement, where things are a little bit more localized, and you know that you can go in and fix a problem and then allow the system to restore itself, that might be a different scenario than something like a psychiatric illness, or developmental illness, where maybe it is really kind of a whole brain phenomenon that might require a lot more data than just what you're collecting in a small portion of the brain or the scale of that problem. That's one perspective. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I guess I'm going to push back on part and agree on part. So when I'm talking about spinal cord injury as an example, right, it isn't that those connections are happening locally. A lot of the plasticity, in fact, we know that's really important, is up in cortex. It's in brain, right? And it's that capacity for remodeling and for figuring things out and adapting over time that is really what's giving the repair, in addition to the local plasticity. Neurodevelopmental disorders is maybe the other end of the extreme, and perhaps some psychiatric illnesses along that continuum, right?
Psychiatric illnesses are neurodevelopmental.
So I wasn't sure if you were going to agree, but I think that's a different kettle of fish, because you may have lost those cues, right? You may have ended up with a structure that's along one end of the continuum, but it's not representing what quote normal adult function would be, or what the median at least is. And so that creates a more complicated thing. If you want to go back and reconstruct that, now you have to understand the building blocks, right, to be able to try and reorganize it and put it back together in a different way.
Yeah, maybe just to follow up on that, particularly for psychiatric disorders. Again, they really are neurodevelopmental disorders. The brain is built differently, and it's not the same as an injury where you can go in and sort of repair something. You have to start over again, or pick these things up so early so that you don't let this happen. Remember, psychiatric disorders often start in childhood, adolescence, and take years before they really kind of express themselves. And so that's going to be a different challenge than recovering from a stroke or from trauma or a spinal cord injury.
I'm going to ask a question, but I'm going to put my hand on my wallet while I do this. Are there new technologies with more capabilities that you would want to see built so that you could envision moving the fields forward? I have to help with the finance.
I can send you a list later, Steve.
What would you like to see? What tools would you like to see created? Give him a second.
All right, go.
Well, actually, I'd like to see Elon Musk's tool work. I'd actually like to see a world in which we actually could put enough fine wires in the cerebral cortex to cover enough territories, partly going to your last question. What percentage of this thing, how fine detailed do you ultimately need to get so that you're able to deal with those most complex operations of the brain? And so we really don't know that. We don't have a clue about that. And one way to possibly get that information would be to develop a 1 million fine wire system inserted into the prefrontal cortex and see if we could actually read out a complex plan, what we like to call prospective thinking, right? This is the ability to put yourself into the future, which path you're going to take. Right now, those kinds of things are beyond us in brain science, all right? Trying to develop a theory of serious cognition is, to be frank, to be honest, because I'm very careful about this kind of thing. To be honest about it, it's beyond where we're at. We just aren't there. and part of that goes to how much detail you need. But to get to those kind of questions, it might be a shortcut. It might actually be a shortcut if you could develop that technology and tap into somebody in a way that was not going to do damage, obviously. It might be a shortcut for us to get to that, because right now we're stymied on the highest levels of operation that the brain does. And in the end of the day, I hate to say it, those are the most interesting parts of it.
Well, my comment has to do with, again, an analogy to the Genome Project. So there were thoughts at the outset of the Genome Project that knowing all the genes would tell you how the system works. And we now know that all it tells you is, in a sense, a list of parts. It doesn't tell you how they assemble, and certainly doesn't tell you how they work. So it may well be somewhat analogous to what I didn't agree with as being sort of the ultimate goal of the Brain Initiative, and that is that even if you could record from every neuron in the brain, it still wouldn't tell you how the brain works if you didn't have some way of making sense out of that, which would require some kind of a conceptual framework, theoretical framework for seeing how you could get the kind of sophisticated functionality that brains have out of all of those connections working together. Knowing the parts list is certainly an important step forward, and that's why I supported the idea of the Brain Initiative. But I never imagined that it would tell us how the brain works. Rather that you need to have the kind of data that I thought we might be able to get from improving our tools as a step towards being able to develop that kind of conceptual framework, and then a back and forth between sort of experiment and theory to be able to put it into a construction that would make sense.
Well said.
Professor, could I just jump in? Why aren't we talking about the optical interface and interfacing with the computer, changing our metabolisms and changing our behavior? I mean, you don't need electrodes. We don't have to be cyborgs. We're already in the What do you have to say on that idea?
Well, it's still at the level of sort of observing how it happens. It's not getting down into the nitty-gritty of how it happens. And that's what these projects are all aimed at doing, because that's become a fairly well accepted notion in our society for what science can do for us. And certainly it's well accepted in medicine.
But what is science doing to us? It's changing it.
Well, we're constantly adapting to the world around us, and as the world around us changes, we adapt further to that. But it's undoubtedly doing things to us that we're only becoming aware of over time, because as I mentioned earlier, humans aren't very good at anticipating consequences of what they do. And so we just have to be vigilant, and those of us who study these kinds of things and write about them have to be out there and making these points and making this as part of an argument in the public square.
Push on the idea of structure, function, and relationships a little bit more, because I think that this is a theme that is obviously a theme of the UCI Brain Initiative that we talked about a little bit earlier today. We talked about the notion of strong AI. We talked about how being able to build a real simulation of the mind is going to take a lot more than the tools that we have right now. And it seems to me that you're saying that right now we still have to get to that first step of really collecting all of the building blocks and the data that's acquired. And then the question is, how do we make sense of it all together? How does it all connect? Well, some people are suggesting that that's where AI comes in. Do we truly believe that? Do we believe that building a sophisticated AI to take all of that data, digest it, and spit out a solution is going to be the answer to this question? Or is it much more complicated than that?
It's interesting you'd bring it up bring up AI in that context. There's a lot of these questions we're kicking around now about how many neurons level of granularity that you actually need to see the critical brain operations emerge, in human brain operations. But these questions are coming into sharp focus now because people have become aware of what AI doesn't do. In fact, they're becoming sharply aware of what AI can't do and will never do. And so there's a movement now afoot to build what's called brain-based AI. Okay, because the brain does these very simple things. I mean, we talk about AI might save brain science. Well, it may very well be the other way around, that brain science may save AI. We say, oh my God, the AI said, diagnosed me, the AI, I talked to Google the other day and the AI said I should do this. AI is everywhere. But imagine that you walk across the Central Park of this campus and I ask you 10 simple questions. No AI on this earth or any AI planned can do that. If I said, you walked across the campus and you saw what? Did you see a dog? Did you see a house? And you say, oh, tell these, whatever did you see? They can't do that, and they're not going to do that. These things aren't really artificial intelligence, they're machine learning. Now, this limitation has become very, very apparent, and people are starting to think in that business, the next phase, true AI, will be brain-based. And all the questions that some of the questions you raised go right to that issue. How much brain do you need to build an artificial intelligence that can replicate higher cognitive functions? Because as it is now, they realize machines aren't going to do it.
So I'll share a small story that I don't know if, is Hal Stern here? Is he here? He was here a little earlier today. So he shared this story with us at a Conti Center meeting, and he said he was lecturing about AI. So Hal Stern is former dean of information and computer sciences on this campus, one of the foremost experts in statistical approaches and artificial intelligence and machine learning. And he was talking about how people talk about this AI work and say, we use the AI to do this and to do that. And he says that's akin to saying we use science to do this. Right? It's very non-specific. It doesn't give you really the level of detail. It's treated as this black box. And really, it gets down to something that Gary Marcus commented on recently also, that we do not have the version of AI that we really need for the future. Right now, we do not have this imaginary AI that we all think is going to hold the future is not there yet. We just simply don't have it at this point.
And it's not coming. Not this way.
And this gets back to a point that was brought up earlier, and that is the idea that every perception is in some sense an act of creation. And how that comes about is something that we're still a very long way from understanding. And I think that knowing sort of what all the component parts of it are is an important step towards it, but by no means it gets you all the way to the finish line.
But baby steps are important, right?
They're necessary.
Can I add something?
Please.
This just is making me think, and this is maybe more of my sort of moral philosophy perspective, is that maybe a challenge for the Brain Initiative is it almost like the research has got ahead of the purpose. You know, it's clear, obviously, you're going to regenerate, allow people who are paralyzed to walk, that there's a clear social good for what we're doing. But so much of what we're doing is to sell more products or to, make you take 3 steps less or whatever it would be. And it's a lens that I never hear about what's the social benefit of what we're doing. I mean, what's the good to humanity? What's the benefit beyond, being first or just doing something different? And so maybe our Brain Initiative could have that as a lens of really to promote research that helps us address a lot of the huge problems that we face right now from climate. I don't need to go through them all, but how can the brain research really make the world a better place? It sounds overly simplistic, but it's an interesting lens to try to put onto it.
How does the audience feel about that? So with that reaction, Nancy, we'll make it so. We'll just make that one of our big goals. Steve.
I feel I want to add in one data point. I was not here this morning, and I apologize because I was in Oakland, but about the AI, we spend a lot of time now thinking how we can improve health with AI, and so we've been hearing that. And among the challenges, the things to remember, those who have worked in computers have heard the phrase that if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. Right now, if we download all of this data from studies, and then we try and predict what's going to happen, what we're realizing very rapidly is the data is as biased as the people who are putting the data into the system. So the data is very good at recognizing a heart attack in a white adult old male and completely misses it in women, because the data hasn't been collected in women the way it was in men, and it was only in the early 1990s that the NIH said, hey, you know what? You need to study women and men. So at this point, it really is still a computer. It is not intelligence, and it is biased by how we program the computer. So we are very far away from what we might hope we can get. The types of places I think we are going to get to first is the ability to, you go to the doctor's sitting there using the computer and you're back here somewhere. Remember, doctors are supposed to look at the patients and talk and listen. At some point, if we can speed the process of having the information get into the record while we are still maintaining relationships, those are maybe more achievable in the early phase. But saying what's wrong with someone is not what the AI is going to do for a very long time. Anyway.
So I have a question that's very, very general, but it's still a fun one to ask. And this is really for anybody here to kind of share that passion. What is the most exciting thing that you find about brain science? About brain science, about neuroscience, studies related to the brain in general. What would be the most exciting thing that you can think of? Ruth, don't say sleep. unless you want to take it up a notch from sleep and say, like, this particular,
It's interesting. I get to meet a lot of folks whose lives have been impacted by Alzheimer's disease, and a lot of them are individuals of significant means, and yet all of them recognize that their brain is what defines their humanity and is their most precious resource. And I hear that over and over again. And a lot of people will come up to us and say, I have donated X amount of money to your institute, but the most important donation I'm going to leave you is my brain.
Well, one thing I think that's terribly exciting about brain science, we live in a world, and this is chronicled constantly, in which all the old things that weren't understood, right? Storms were caused by Poseidon and all this magic that was in the world. And over time, science has gradually removed all the basis for these myths. And we come to a world that, from the point of view of some artists and some writers, is actually a much more prosaic and boring world than the one that used to be, because we don't have that sense of the unknown. And I think the strange thing that brain science does, and I think brain science and theoretical physics share this, brain science is taking us into a world of mystery, into the world of the unknown. We sit up here and tell you that, well, that's way past our capabilities right now. Give us about 10 or 15 years. And by the way, a bunch of money. We always say that. But actually, we don't know. We don't know where this particular journey is going. It's going into what might be the deepest mystery that humans have ever encountered, which is, oddly enough, right here. So I think I think we do that. I think we brain scientists do that. I think we bring mystery into the world.
I think maybe just to add on to that slightly, when I was in graduate school, which was not, that incredibly long ago, seriously, the dogma was that your brain didn't have any neural stem cells. We all learned that as flat truth. And the two things that I study, the immune system and how it interacts with the brain, and neural stem cells, the flat dogma for both of those is that they didn't exist, right? So that's a fair bit of movement in terms of our conceptualization. Why does that happen? Because we have different tools. So coming back kind of to Steve's question is we can only ask the questions that we have the tools to ask. And that has changed so dramatically in the last 20 years or so that it really is incredible. And I find that to be just really exciting, right? So if you look up at the sky and you see the stars, that's an entirely different game than looking through the Hubble telescope, right? And that's about resolution and what you can see and what you can visualize. And it's about being able to have that magnification in a snapshot of time versus in real time. And both of those things have advanced incredibly. So we can get information about processing in real time now. We can get resolution at the single cell level and understand all of the different kinds of neurons that there are and the cells that make up the brain at a much different level than was even imaginable really at that time. And so the exciting thing for me actually is the tools that we have to apply and therefore the different sorts of questions that we can ask.
I think the most compelling mystery is that our brains are, in some very important sense, who we are. And that's a conglomeration and a synthesis of an enormous number of things, all of our past, all of our experiences, all of our perceptions, all of our physiology, and all of our body, as well as our brains, because they're all integrated and it's all communicating with each other and influencing each other. So it's the idea that we have a sense of who we are and that our brains are absolutely essential for having that. And it may be a mystery that is more than we will ever be able to get on top of, but it's going to keep us intrigued and it's very well worth the effort to try to understand.
It's a good question because we all want to answer it, right? No, I think for me the most exciting thing about all of the advances in neuroscience is really that it's the most credible evidence to promote well-being and good. And I'll just give you another example. And this is, one of our faculty in our school, Beth Kaufman, she actually, her research and the research that she cited was in a Supreme Court brief that raised the age for juveniles to be considered adults. We have a history in this country of locking up 15-year-olds who are oversensitive to reward, undersensitive to punishment, have not fully functioning executive functioning, don't think about future consequences, and they do something stupid, and that's it for the rest of their lives. They're locked up forever. So the research, I think, was probably the most significant thing that it was hard for people who are tough on crime to refute that because, as politicians, you can't be too tough on crime and you can't lock enough people up. But with that kind of research, people started understanding that, wait, maybe, 15-year-olds are not yet adults and that you're not an adult till you're 25 in terms of your brain functioning. So it's something I've seen also, I've been to community meetings where people are talking about young offenders and the people working in agencies, they start citing the brain research and talking about executive functioning. So it's not, in a lot of ways, it's very highly sophisticated from the people here on this panel, but it gets into the public dialogue and the public narrative quite easily. So I think it really has a great capacity for benefiting humanity.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, I would suggest that that's exactly the reason why everybody is here. And it's particularly this point of brain science is not just for the scientists that are doing that science, it's for everyone. So this is really a testament to you to, continue to be educated on brain science, and to the extent that it can help change our society for the better, I think we all want to do that part.
Should we keep going?
How we doing? How you guys doing? It's 7:30. A lot of great questions.
Great question.
I got a couple of really fun ones that'll probably get at least the audience kind of talking. You want to ask a couple?
I'm going to shift gears a little.
Yeah.
One of the questions was, do babies come equipped with pure emotional states like anger or sadness?
Ooh. I love that.
I said mine did.
So the emotional states of children, Nancy probably could, are not very well.
I think your microphone may be.
I think you got to turn it on.
Is it on?
Yep.
Now it
Okay,
is.
now somebody turned it off.
You see, we do have a little bit of competition
So-
sometimes, but
so-
we work on.
The question was, do faculty members come with all these emotions?
Yeah, they're all sort of. So no. Cognitive emotional development takes a long time to occur. I mean, just to follow up what Nancy said, we know actually the brain doesn't finish developing until the middle of the third decade of life. So, adolescence really goes till the mid-20s. And as I always say, as the mother of two boys, that was the only thing that allowed me to survive growing up. The emotional states of infants are much less well developed and less well defined, and we get more emotional complexity as we get older, and cognitive and emotional development sort of go hand in hand. Nancy, you want to?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting too, because this is another cross-cultural. So obviously we're pre-wired to have different emotions, but the simple emotions develop first. So anger and fear, and the ones that are much less complex. And if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, are important for our survival and our development. And then the more complex emotions like guilt, which is a really interesting one for those of you who've had children, like when guilt starts developing, and shame. And those, I think, as Ruth was mentioning, depend on more sophisticated cognitive understanding. And so for young children, they very much focus on their own perspective. They can't take the other person's perspective. So it's hard to feel guilt when you don't understand that someone else was hurt by it. And as we get older, then we can take a third person perspective and look at the dynamic of the dyadic interaction. But they unfold almost always in the same order across cultures. So obviously, we couldn't survive without some ability to feel emotion. There are extreme cases of psychopathy, for example, and you might talk about that, where the emotional system and the reward and punishment system is developed quite differently.
You could tell you're not Italian because guilt develops very early in Italians.
Are you born with it? He's born and he said, "I'm sorry, Mom, that it took me so long to come out."
Well, so this is a very specific question, and I'm trying to figure out if I can extract from the content of this question the person who actually asked it, but it's going to be difficult. The question is, how much alcohol is too much for the brain? For example, minimum levels of consumption. Notice they didn't say maximum levels, they said minimum levels of consumption per year, week. Is there an optimality to this?
So, Claudia Kawas has done a lot of work in this area with the 90 plus, the individuals who are among the oldest old. And at least what she's found out in the selective group is that 1 or 2 drinks of alcohol a day seem to be beneficial and to help reduce the rate of cognitive decline. And what she always adds afterwards is that it's not clear if it's something in the alcohol, and she's the first to say it doesn't matter if it's red wine, beer, or hard liquor, or if it is that most people who drink 1 or 2 glasses a day do it in a social setting. So it comes back to what was said earlier, and that when you're in a social setting, it reduces your stress level, you're stimulated, you're having fun usually, and so we still don't know the answer to that, but it does seem that 1 or 2 glasses of something a day are beneficial.
And just to double check, Betty, what's your answer to that question?
So that's a general thing. I as a sleep person, though, the relationship between alcohol and psychomotor impairment is a little bit more complicated. So, yes, in general, having a glass or 2 of wine in a social setting may help your brain do a little bit better, but it's not necessarily good for your driving. And and what we know is that the quote legal limit of blood alcohol is sort of meaningless, so that an individual who is sleep deprived and may have a legal, below the legal cutoff limit for alcohol could be far more impaired than someone who is drunk but well rested. So that there's an interaction. If you're a blood alcohol level.
Sorry,
is
are you
meaningless.
endorsing drinking and driving if you're well rested?
Just sleeping, drinking, and driving.
Right. That was the problem.
So blood alcohol levels are meaningless if you don't know how sleep deprived
Right.
someone is. So, and that's
Right.
why when you're tired and you have a drink, you're gonna fall asleep right away. And if you're not tired and you have a drink, you can keep partying on for a while. So it's important. Are you picking on?
So you each have stump speeches, so I'm not asking for that. But the question that's being asked is, when you look at the future of UCI neuroscience, what makes this the place to be?
Should I go first?
Please.
Okay. One, it's highly collaborative and very interactive. And I think earlier you presented a list of all the centers that are, on the campus, and that is truly remarkable. I think it's the reason that so many faculty want to come and join us, including you and Mike recently, right? I mean, it's a great place to be. There's wonderful history. There's great resources, and we're working on some of the most important problems that are facing our society today, from Alzheimer's to addiction, to basic mechanisms of learning and memory, to sleep disorders, neuropsychiatric disorders, to autism. I mean, we got it, spinal cord injury. I think we got it all covered. And it's one of the most productive areas of the campus, and it's one of the crown jewels of the campus. And so I think all of you should be very proud to be in an area that has this kind of level of, neuroscience activity. And just getting back to what the centers that we have here, the Conti Center and the ADRC and all the other centers, the National Institutes of Health describes those centers as national treasures. And I think one of the things that we're at fault is we don't do a good enough a job really communicating that
Right.
to the community. How fortunate we are to be in a county like Orange County that has these centers in our own backyard.
Right.
Add on and second what Frank said about the collaboration here. So I've been at other institutions, and this is definitely one of the most collaborative places that I've been at. People here really try to help each other. We like to work together. We really appreciate what it is to be on a team as opposed to, having to be competitive with each other, I think. And I think we all recognize that we're stronger when we work together.
Aileen?
So in the pitch side of things, just putting on my stem cell center director hat for a second, I think, we all have a lot of hopes in California for stem cell research in particular, certainly in the context of renewing the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. And what may not be entirely apparent to the outside community is that UCI is really looked at as the center for that in the context of the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord.
Right.
We have a greater concentration here than at any other institution across the state in terms of expertise in this area. We're bringing in new faculty and building in this area. And so we hope looking forward that we really are going to continue to build on that we're positioned to be that center of excellence and continue to be that center of excellence going forward for the next 15 years of that kind of research.
I will tell you again, coming from the outside, what we need is to tell more people what we are. This is an extraordinary collection of people who are at the cutting edge of what's going on around the world. And then they don't brag enough. So we have to brag for them.
That's why Money Magazine rated us
There you
the
go.
#1 college in America. And like you said, we knocked Princeton off of its perch. I mean, that's remarkable. And we're the first public university to hold that honor ever in the history of these rankings. So that's pretty remarkable.
Well, we hear this quite often on campus that our product is much better than our brand, and I think that's very true in terms of needing the ambassadorship also from everybody here. If you have come to these events, if you've come to talks and you've listened and you've learned something and you understand the capacity of UCI researchers to really make a difference, then we ask you to go out and talk to others about this as well and bring them into the community as much as possible. So I have one other question I want to ask everybody on this panel. Maybe we can kind of go one by one. And this is a very, very simple question. It has to do with time. How many years? How many years do you think it will take for us to achieve a complete understanding of the brain? You can be pessimistic, you can be optimistic. I'm just curious at the variability that we'll get along this panel.
Wow, you should go first. Yeah. I'm going to keep it down to that.
So I'll answer the question a little differently. When I got into the Alzheimer's disease field around 1990, there had been some major discoveries that were made, and people thought a cure for Alzheimer's was 3 to 5 years away. And then in 1992, another major discovery happened, and a cure was 3 to 5 years away. Same thing happened in 1995 when the animal models were developed and more genes were discovered. And then in 1998, when a new disorder was described, and in 1999, when immunotherapy was introduced, a cure was 3 to 5 years away. We've been saying that a cure for Alzheimer's is 3 to 5 years away for at least the last 30 something years. And I don't think we're any closer than when we were, back in the 1990s, right? I mean, we still have a lot of work to do. So I would use that as one example. I think we have a lot of work to do yet. I think, as Gary alluded to, it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money.
I guess the other way to look at that is what do we mean by understanding, right? And so we started off with kind of a perception, with a question about perception. And I think we're evolving some general principles, right? And we're evolving some very concrete ideas about how we can target therapies or make things better. But what is actually understanding the human brain? And that catapults us into a different level of thinking about this. And if you take into account the enormous variation that we have individual to individual, I think it's hard to even think about that question and say, what does that mean? Because that individuality is about your brain, and it's about what makes us. And I'm not sure that it's possible to achieve like what I would call an instantaneous snapshot that would tell us everything about Mike or anyone else in this room.
Can I also add another thing, though? And sometimes we forget that science is like fashion. And I don't know if you would agree with this, Ruth, but when I was in graduate school, studying sleep was not a sexy thing to study, right? Just like studying the skin. But now it's one of the hottest areas, right? And we recognize the importance of it.
Yeah, I'm still stuck on the understanding part. I mean, I've been thinking, to me, what's fascinating about the brain and why I study the brain and take care of people with problems with their brains, because it's the most unique aspect of us. It's the only really organ in our body that's truly irreplaceable. And so I'm not sure if we're ever going to totally understand it. That I'm maybe a pessimist there, but
Can I jump in, because right now I'm beginning to get really depressed.
Me too. I wish I didn't ask this question.
But I'm sure the million electrodes will do something. But I just want to do a glass half full for a second. All right, it may take many years for us to get to whatever it is, and even to understand the philosophy of what it means to understand it. But just to give examples of how we can use each step of what we're learning.
Yeah.
The collaboration that's going on right now on this campus has produced something I think is really rather remarkable. So the radiologists in our hospital system do scans of the brain if someone comes in with a stroke. And we use AI, which we just said was really not so fancy, to analyze those and speak rapidly to the neurosurgeon to tell them what's going on. And as a result, over the last 18 months, what's different now is that the average time it takes to start treating someone with a stroke in our hospital is under 5 minutes.
Wow.
On average, everywhere else, it's 68 minutes. Now, not having blood flow to a portion of your brain for 68 minutes is different than 5. So it may be a while until we understand it. It may be a while before AI does everything we want it to do. But what the discoveries that, and the collaborative efforts that are happening are changing lives now. So I just need to insert, now we can go back to the previously recorded message.
The 75% neocortex. Vast amount of repetition. The units of cortex are repeated over and over and over again. So imagine we came across the computer and we were looking at it for the first time, and we went into it, and you would see all these strange bits and pieces, but you would probably, if you were a good engineer, reach the point where you said, my God, most of it is on this memory system. And the elements in that memory system are the same thing repeated over and over and over again and again and again. And you probably would understand the interface reasonably well. So at that point, you could ask yourself, well, do you understand the computer? And you wouldn't understand the computer because what you wouldn't have was the programming. And I deeply suspect that we will never understand the brain in perhaps the way you meant it, because I don't know that we'll ever understand the programming of those trillions of bits. I mean, we may reach a point where we can say, this is the substratum, this is it. Now can I explain Yassa? Not that I'd want to do that, but I don't think you're going to get there, because I don't think in the end of the day we're ever going to understand how each individual shapes their own machine.
I just had the scariest thought, though. What would happen if we could actually do brain transplants? Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be you.
Well, you mean if we switched brains?
No, if we got to, if science got to the point where you could, I mean, we didn't think we could do face transplants. And when you have a different face, you're kind of you, but you're not totally you. And I mean, just, it was this. So who would you be? Yeah, that's true, yeah, but what? Yeah, it's bizarre. But the body wouldn't be the body. The body would be the brain. Right. That's true. It's just
that's the point. If you did a brain transplant into another body,
it would be the brain is you. It would just look different. It's just a funny thought for late at night.
We can watch Reading Frankenstein one more time, and we'll.
Yeah, exactly.
I think our ability to predict, our ability to say when a discovery is going to occur is never going to be possible to pin down, because I don't believe that it's predictable any more than the fact that we barely understand what the process of discovery is. And what we know from sociological studies is what conditions will prevent discoveries from occurring, which, alas, are true of many of our academic institutions, but not true of ones that have a kind of collaborative, multidisciplinary atmosphere that we've heard here about UCI, and that I think is part of what we have at UCSD as well. And those give rise to it in ways that are still not predictable, because there's no way that anybody would be able to say what an act of creation looks like in the brain. And that's what a discovery is. And it's not something that we're going to get to. And they're stochastic events. And we may be able to understand something about conditions that foster them and conditions that prevent them, but we're not going to understand what it is itself, I don't think, anytime in the foreseeable future.
I'm gonna do my lemonade from lemons one more time. When I welcome new medical students to starting their training, I tell them that what's exciting is that they're not going to learn facts, but they're going to learn how to think. Because things that we're teaching them this year will be outdated before they graduate, and they have to constantly be. And then I really scare them. I say, when I was sitting where they're sitting, there was no AIDS, there was no PCR, there was no MRI. There was one CAT scan in all of Boston, and we thought maybe we should share it with other cities. The world has, just think about what's happened with cell phones in the last 10 years. I think we need to be open to the idea that that collaborative process jumps in leaps. It changes the question because it turns it on its head. And again, the work that these folks are doing has already changed the world. And every 5 years, I'm not sure you're not shocked by what the question you're now asking, because how far you've gone. So it's a great question, but I think it's open-ended because it asks you to look at what we've already achieved while staying humble.
Well, I think it's important to also leave some aspects of this to still be a mystery, right? I think that's what motivates all of us to keep doing what we're doing. That's what motivates everybody to come out and listen to the brilliant scientists talk about the work that they're doing. So with that, I think we should probably close and thank our panelists for